this again.
Caius beats the heart of chaos. The goddess has gifted him the curse of eternity.
And once we open the gate, you'll be...
Final Fantasy XIII-2 is a weird game. Because depending on who you ask, it's either a game that fixed everything wrong with Final Fantasy XIII-1, or a sequel that overcorrected so hard it created entirely new problems. And honestly, after replaying this thing for the first time in years, I kind of understand both sides of that argument. This is a game that I barely remember. I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it either. It just sort of happened to me back in the day, if I can use it that way. And yet, somehow, over the years, 13-2 became one of the fan-favorite games of this trilogy. The one that people point to and say, no, this is the good one. So after replaying Final Fantasy XIII earlier this year, I somehow walked away actually kinda liking that game a little bit more than I expected. I knew I had to come back and revisit the sequel, because honestly that's why I even started looking at the 13 trilogy in the first place. It was to replay 13-2. Because I genuinely wanted to know, does 13-2 actually deserve that reputation that it got over the years? And after rolling the credits, well, I think the answer is a little bit more complicated than I expected.
I can change the future?
Yes. They believe the hardships of the present fade with the passage of time. And so we hope, waiting for a future brighter than today. But Sarah, remember this.
Before we even talk about 13-2 in and of itself though, we gotta do what we did last time as well. Have a bit of a Final Fantasy history powwow retrospective look at what the timeline was like back in the day. Because around this time, Final Fantasy felt a bit weirdly uncertain. 13 had split fans kind of straight down the middle. Sure, the reviewers gave it some pretty good scores surprisingly, but among the fan base of Final Fantasy specifically, there were people who liked it and people who absolutely didn't like it, let's say. Meanwhile, 14 launched during this time and it was an outright disaster in its 1.0 form. As someone who's still playing Final Fantasy XI, which is why this review is so late, I really remember just being super excited for 14 and then it coming out and being what it was. So I was really worried for Final Fantasy at this time. It was just kind of like, oh geez, what are you guys doing over there? And then there were the spin-offs. There were just so many spin-off titles to Final Fantasy at the moment. There were some that were good, some were okay, and some that just kind of came out. But outside of something like Dissidia, which still has a passionate fan base even to this day, including myself, nothing really felt like a huge slam dunk with the franchise. And for the first time in a very long time, it genuinely felt like Square Enix just wasn't really sure what Final Fantasy was supposed to be anymore. And then, out of nowhere, 13-2 gets announced. A direct sequel to a game that a lot of people probably wanted to move away from, and maybe a small amount of people were really excited for. And honestly, it just kind of feels weird to say even now, because Final Fantasy games don't get direct sequels very often. Sure, 10-2 happened, but that's Final Fantasy X. Of course it got a sequel. It's one of the biggest games of all time. It's one of the most celebrated Final Fantasy titles. Of course it got a sequel. Who wouldn't make a sequel of it? But something about 13 getting a sequel after so many mixed receptions online, and it just felt unexpected. And compared to 13's massive launch push, 13-2 felt way more reserved. There was less spectacle, less bombast, less cross-media collaboration, less that this is the next evolution of Final Fantasy. And the marketing itself was just quieter all over. The energy felt different. And while Lightning was front and center still, and rocking a genuinely cool redesign by the way, the actual setup for the game ended up being something pretty different than what the marketing initially led us to believe. Because instead of focusing on Lightning and her shift into this crazy, cool goddess knight form, we actually follow Sarah, her younger sister, and Noel, a mysterious hunter from the future. And I'm not gonna lie, back in the day that threw me off a little bit. And for what it's worth, they did have trailers and explanations saying that we're gonna be following these two characters. It's just, who was paying attention to that when Lightning looked so cool? I'm just saying, you put Lightning on the cover and you make her the face of the trailers and suddenly I'm following two different people. There's even a PlayStation 3, like a limited edition PlayStation 3 that has Lightning on it. And I'm like, but Lightning is barely in this game. Either way, it wasn't like Metal Gear 2 levels of bait and switch, but younger me definitely had some questions about this. Still, once the game finally launched, something interesting happened. The reception was better. It's not universally glowing or anything, but it was noticeably warmer than 13. And replaying it now, I can feel why, because more than anything, Final Fantasy XIII-2 feels like a game built out of corrections. No jumping in the first game? Cool, you can jump now. Is it too linear? Well, there's lots of branching paths. Combat too restrictive? Guess what? You get the paradigm system right away, and there's lots of harder bosses. Character progression was too simple? Well, I hope you like min-maxing dozens of characters. And is the plot too straightforward? Well, guess what? Time travel, baby. You can practically see the development team sitting around a room and just kind of looking at the forum complaints and saying, well, you didn't like that? Okay, we'll just change it. And honestly, it works mostly, because while Final Fantasy XIII-2 improves a lot of what people didn't like about the original, it loses some of what made 13 just feel deliberate in the process, in my opinion. It's freer, messier, a bit more experimental, sometimes better and sometimes more frustrating, but it's undeniably more interesting than I remember. And after finally replaying it, I kind of understand why people love this game so much. I don't think I love it for quite the same reasons, so let's keep talking about it. First and foremost, the biggest thing that you notice about 13-2 is that this game is no longer linear, and I mean that in almost every way possible. If you just follow the main story naturally, you notice it too almost right away. Early areas are pretty brisk for sure, but before long you just start noticing the things that are out of reach. The little side paths, the treasure spheres that you somehow missed, or choices that you did or didn't make. They're just moments that make you stop and say, wait, how do I get over there, or what happens if I choose another option? That feeling of curiosity and that curiosity just feels like the entire design philosophy of 13-2. Because unlike the first game, which seems laser focused on pushing you forward from A to B, 13-2 wants you to explore. It wants experimentation, backtracking, getting lost, and honestly at first I kinda really liked it. The entire game's structure revolves around time travel and paradoxes, and to be fair, Square Enix really commits to this idea. I really like it. Areas are broken up into different timelines, different versions of the same locations, and different outcomes depending on what choices you make in some of the key areas. And what surprised me most about this was just how much stuff is missable if you just keep going forward and don't ever look back. Seriously, you can just absolutely critical path this game if you want, but if you do, you're gonna miss a ton, like extra items, extra progression, optional bosses and enemies, extra partners that can join your party, entire chunks of the story, and some really cool alternate routes. What's neat is that revisiting areas actually matters too. You're not just going back because the game says, hey, do you remember this map? The areas are really interesting and kind of poke you and prod you saying, hey, don't you want to check out this thing one more time? You can unlock new paths or gain access to things that you weren't able to go to before. Suddenly that place that you just thought you were done with becomes relevant again. There's this constant feeling that the world is just kind of moving and permeating around you. that time itself just really matters. I just really like it. And for a game centered around paradoxes, that is pretty cool. But I do think there's a bit of a trade-off here. Because while 13 might be overly restrictive, it was also very focused in its approach. It knew exactly where it wanted your attention. 13.2 goes in the almost complete opposite direction. It's freer, it's more adventurous, but it's significantly more fragmented as a result. You're constantly time hopping, trying to remember what versions of the area had the thing that you're looking for if you do decide to go off the beaten path. And whether you already checked something somewhere, or did you already talk to this NPC, or is the NPC you're looking for in this timeline or another one, because one area is called Brescia 10AF and the other one's called Brescia 10XX, and you're just like, I have to decide which one is which, I don't remember. It's honestly a little confusing. And every now and then you just kind of stop and think like, wait, what was I doing exactly? And sometimes it works, and sometimes it genuinely feels exciting, and other times it just feels like the game forgot where it wanted your attention to be. And I will say, we've come a long way in game design where it kind of points you in directions or has cursor markers that really remind you where stuff is, and this game is kind of on that cusp of before we started doing that in a real serious way. That said, once the systems do click, it's pretty intuitive. Or at least, I should say, it's eventually intuitive. Because holy crap, this game does a really bad job of explaining itself early on. The core progression systems of opening gates and unlocking timelines and revisiting locations, it sounds complicated at first, but in practice it's pretty simple. Find a key, unlock a gate, go to the next area, explore until you can't, and then you come back later. Repeat, repeat, repeat. That's the very basic layman gameplay loop. But man, this game tries its hardest to overcomplicate the explanation. There's an alternate timeline menu that somehow makes things even less understandable than the normal one, and I genuinely had to laugh out loud when I opened it for the first time. I was like, wait, Square, what are we doing here? Like, what is the point of this? Still though, once it clicks, usually after the first few hours of gameplay, it becomes one of the game's strongest ideas. It feels important and adventurous, and honestly, it just feels like your curiosity is actually rewarded in this game. And that's something that 13 really struggled with. But one thing I genuinely don't really like about this game is the dialogue system. It actually might be my biggest problem with the game entirely, because this is the era where Mass Effect was popular, so Mass Effect did dialogue choices, thus we must do dialogue choices too. And 13.2 absolutely jumps on that trend. 13.2 even has Mass Effect costumes. Either way, not only is the implementation here just awkward, it's not awful, but it's not game ruining, it's just weird. Most of the time you get 4 dialogue choices, and in theory it's a cool idea. It adds a little role-playing flair, and it shapes some conversations. Except it mostly doesn't matter at all usually. One progresses the story, one's usually a joke, one feels just weird and not relevant to anything, just kind of sudden, and the other is probably for a side quest. And every time, well, not every time, but most times I would choose an option and thinking I'm going to get more explanation, and then suddenly a cutscene starts and it's like, oh, okay, I guess that was the trigger for the next story moment. And I genuinely picked some wrong options more than once, or things that I thought were the wrong options, and it's like, okay, this is a silly response of like asking where Saz is even though we're looking for lightning. Nope, choosing Saz was the trigger for the next cutscene. Literally, it's just like cutscene, story, moving on. It's like, wait, I wasn't done with that conversation, can I go back? Nope, unless you redo the entire area. It's weirdly frustrating, especially because of this fragmented story structure. It really asks a lot of your attention, and whenever you want to learn more, the game sometimes just suddenly pushes forward, so instead of helping the immersion, it just kind of takes away from it. And it's not enough to ruin anything, but Every time it happened, I just found myself saying, geez, again? You're just moving on when I wasn't ready? Another system that sounds way more complicated than it actually is the gate ceiling. This basically lets you reset the area and redo the story moments and make new decisions and get different outcomes. This is really helpful for unlocking alternate routes and completing side quests if there's anything related to it. I expected to use this way more than I did, because if you're just playing normally, you barely need it, like, at all. Like, you can clear this game without ever touching this mechanic. Like, I got to the end of the game, and I was just wondering, like, wait, why do I still have this side quest flagged? Like, how do I do this exactly? Or, like, how do I get to this next area? And that's when it's clicked for me. It's like, oh, that's how you do it. I have to reset the area, choose a different dialogue option, and then I can get a different gate. Now it's a totally different thing. Oh, I understand now. But once again, overly complicated explanation made me just immediately write it off. If you're a casual player, pay attention to the tutorial because it's not exactly easy to understand. So yeah, it's fine, but yeah, not a mechanic I particularly love. It's interesting, I don't love it. And then there is the return of one of gaming's favorite things from the late 2000s and early 2010s, QTEs. And actually they're honestly a little charming these days. In battle they get added to little bonuses for damage and some attacks, so you can like change the animations, or if you do them well you do extra damage. And in cutscenes you get slightly different outcomes, like if you dodge and land the prompt, then your character doesn't take damage. If you miss the prompt, your character gets knocked back. It's pretty cinematic and very video gamey, and I don't know. It felt like going back in time, and I enjoyed it. It's definitely a dated system, and there's definitely some annoying ones in the battle system, but I didn't mind them. They're not that many in the cutscenes, because I think this is around the time where people were starting to write off QTEs, but they do show up, but they're mostly front-loaded, so you don't worry about it too much. And I like that the game gives you small rewards for engaging with them properly. If you do them correctly, sometimes you get extra items and whatnot once the scenes are over. It's nothing major, but it does make you think, alright, yeah, I'll hit the buttons. But honestly, for all of the structural changes 13.2 makes, the biggest improvement for me is the combat. Because if 13 had one thing going for it that I pretty much liked, it was the combat system. That fast-paced mix of real-time pressure with the RPG strategy that came into some of the challenge fights in the back half of the game, stuff like paradigm shifting, staggering enemies, and just constantly adjusting roles mid-fight. It was something I really liked, that kind of flow state that it induced, and 13.2 somehow takes that foundation and just tightens it up. It doesn't reinvent it and it doesn't completely change things, it just refines it. Everything feels that much more snappier, a little smoother, more responsive. Everything just flows better. And the bosses too have a lot more pushback this time around in terms of the normal story ones. If you're not really familiar with what the mechanics are of the game, with things like the defense bonus that Sentinel gives, or staggering enemies by building up your chains with Ravager, and stopping the countdown with Commando, then this game will give you a run for your money in some of the fights, even in the story battles. You can tell pretty quickly that this game just expects you to just actually understand the systems, even on normal difficulty. You can't just mash through everything, sort of. I mean, you can try, but then you would need to grind a bit more, which is just play the game as it's meant to be played. But eventually, the game will absolutely humble you in some of those challenge fights, especially the hidden ones and the DLC fights. I actually kind of appreciate that, because some of the battles I would try and then say, oh, can't do that yet, and come back later with some new monsters, new powers and abilities and new stats. Get humbled again, and then come back again later. And yeah, like I said, I like that, because this battle system finally feels that much more realized. Like, 13 was that foundation, and 13.2 figured out the rhythm perfectly. There are still bits of weirdness in it, especially with things like the camera and certain enemy attacks that are just a mess visually, but overall I think this is definitely an improvement over the first game, at least mechanically. But the biggest shakeup this time around is that third party slot, because instead of controlling a cast member like in the first game, your third character is now a monster. And honestly, the system is a little bit deeper than I remembered, like kind of shockingly so, because what 13.2 basically does is take Pokemon and throw it into Final Fantasy. And it works. You can recruit over 150 monsters throughout the game, including some of the DLC battles. Every single one of them also fulfills a combat role: Commando, Medic, Saboteur, Sentinel, all of that good stuff. And building a team becomes this weirdly addictive little side obsession to the game. And the best part is, you don't even have to go far out of your way for it. After battles, enemies have a random chance of joining you, and while RNG is definitely a part of it, there's actually a little mechanic where if you use your monster's finishing move, it boosts the chance of your recruitment, which is a pretty neat little touch in my opinion. It's nothing too complicated, but just enough to make you feel like, alright, I'll try that one more time. And before you know it, you're farming black chocobos for 2 hours. Again, because JRPG brain rot is a real thing. Where this whole thing really surprised me though was the amount of customization, because Sarah and Noel, their progression is pretty straightforward. You level their roles and their stats increase. You sure can min-max a bit if you really care about what node you're putting your points into for what job and whatnot, but overall it'll probably end up fine for them no matter what you choose. The monsters though, that's where the real madness is in all of this. Because every monster, even if they're the same kind of monster, has different stats, different growth curves, different passive abilities, different level caps. Some peak early, some become endgame monsters, some look absolutely useless until they get to really far into their growth. And then you can infuse monsters into each other, and where you just pass on passive abilities to each other. Meaning, if you really want to break this game, you definitely can. You can create some genuinely disgusting builds here, like my Odin and Lightning turned out to be two of my most strongest characters with all of the passives, like getting HP on hit and recovering shields and all of that crazy stuff. Honestly, I got super into it, especially in the back half of the game, just seeing my stats go up and seeing this almost paragraph of just passive abilities that I've added to my monsters. It was great. So it really rewards hunting down stronger monsters, experimenting with party setups, and even building up weaker monsters just so you can use them to put them into stronger ones. I just kind of realized suddenly that this whole system is absolutely busted, but in the best kind of way, because it kind of wants you to break it. It wants you to make these really strong characters for these challenging battles that exist in the game. It really just became one of my favorite parts of the game, and unlike a lot of RPG systems that look deep but secretly aren't, this one rewards experimentation, and the further you push it, the more you get out of it. And for people who like min-maxing, it's like catnip. It's definitely catnip. And weirdly enough, some of the coolest combat content is actually in the DLC, which, unless you're playing on a PlayStation 3 with the original version, and 360 I guess, the DLC actually comes with the PC version, so you don't need to go in and look for having to pay any extra for these really cool characters and battle scenarios. You can unlock characters when you defeat them too, like Lightning, Snow, Omega, and of course, everyone's favorite, or at least my favorite, Jill. That's right, we finally get Jill Nabat as a playable character. It kind of feels like Square Enix was apologizing for wasting her in the first game, where it was like, hey, you like Jill, we like Jill, let's just put her in the game one more time. And these battles are not easy either, like, at all. I tried them early in the game, and I couldn't do it at all, so I tried them way later, several times, and still got my butt kicked. And then I could finally beat them near the end of the game, so that was always what it was for. It was always kind of like a New Game Plus-ish level of combat challenge. But honestly, the payoffs are worth it because these characters are hilariously strong and borderline broken. And then there's also Lightning and Saw's DLC. Both of those have really interesting things because Saz's DLC is just kind of more of the mini games, but you also get to see what he was up to during this time because he does show up in the story. And then there is the Lightning DLC, which I especially like because while it is simply combat DLC on the surface, it's kind of annoying in that way, honestly. It's just kind of fighting Caius over and over again until you beat him, and then you get like the true ending to the game. And I actually like that this DLC has a true ending because the base game story leaves you hanging a little bit, and the DLC, Lightning's DLC conclusion, it gives a lot of emotional context and weight to the game's story, and especially Sarah and Lightning's relationship. You don't get a lot of it in the game. You understand that they're very close, but the DLC really kind of drives it home how close they are and how Lightning feels about putting Sarah in this situation. And honestly, I'll be real, it kind of becomes a pattern with 13.2. Like, some of its best stuff is just kind of hidden a little too far in the peripheries, in my opinion, but that's how this game is in particular. I mentioned in the first game's review, but there's a gold saucer-like area, and it returns again this time. But now, instead of it being just a story backdrop, it actually has a couple of mini-games for us to engage with ad nauseum until we're sick of it. You get a blackjack minigame, a slot machine, and good old-fashioned chocobo racing. And the chocobo racing is the most interesting one, since the chocobos you capture for combat can be used for the stable runs as well. I kind of appreciate the fact that they took the time to put this kind of thing in here because it was obviously a big missing part of 13's original game. And once again, this is a game of corrections, so it feels appropriate that something like this is going to be included. It's nothing too serious or too interesting, but it is a nice little side distraction. And it's also the focus of Saz's DLC area as well. His entire DLC focuses on going through the gambling minigames. So if you're into them, it's a good time, but if you're like me, it's just kinda not so great. But I appreciate that they took the time to make it. Overall though, combat is probably the easiest thing to recommend about 13.2. If you like 13's combat, you'll probably love this version. If you didn't, honestly, this game won't convince you either. Because at its core, it is the same systems, just a little bit faster, snappier, smarter, and with way more room to experiment. But we gotta talk about one thing that people are most divided on, the story. And yeah, it's a time travel story, that's for sure. This is probably where most of my feelings are mixed about 13.2, because I think it has some genuinely strong ideas, like it has some really memorable characters, especially the villain, he's pretty great, but also the first half of this game is pretty messy and rough. It has a ton of downtime and there's not a lot happening in the actual story. I think there is lots of little minor setup and narrative bits and bobs here and there, but the game proper, like in terms of a really good story, doesn't happen until like the halfway point, in my opinion. That said, the game does open up strong enough. Lightning is suddenly fighting a mysterious armored dude who looks like this crazy visual K-rock god guy. Things are exploding, summons are happening, and nobody's explaining anything. But eventually you see Noel, and Lightning sends him on a journey to find Sarah. And while this is happening, Sarah wakes up from what she thinks is a dream, only to find monsters attacking her town, and that's where the adventure kicks off. It's a pretty simple setup, and yes, despite Lightning being on almost every part of the marketing, the game is actually about Sarah and Noel, which honestly worked better than I expected because I actually like Sarah as a character. I didn't think I would, but I actually do. For people who might be questioning her, because, you know, Lightning is this very cool, powerful character, but instead we're going to play as her younger sister, who's a lot more, I don't know what the word I would use, she's a lot more normal and not a cool person. She's kind of a sweet character. Sarah ends up being one of the more grounded protagonists in the entire trilogy, honestly, and she's capable, likable, but yeah, you just kind of like Sarah by the end of the game. Noel, though, he took me a bit longer to come around on. Early on, he feels strangely inconsistent, mostly thanks to that dialogue system once again, but sometimes he just acts super knowledgeable about things, and other times he just asks questions that feel very obvious. Sometimes he feels mature, and other times he's just weirdly impulsive and immature. And for a while, I just didn't know how to feel about him, but eventually he won me over. It just takes a little bit more time. Once again, his turnaround comes in that back half of the game. So yeah, just unfortunately, I think this game takes a little too much time to get to the meat of its narrative elements, but once they do get there, it becomes interesting. Because here's the thing, for a surprisingly large chunk of 13.2, you're just kind of moving forward, and it sounds harsher than I mean it to be, because the combat and catching monsters and some interesting little bits and bobs here and there are interesting, but if you ask me which parts of the game I remember, it's basically everything from the halfway point back, and everything in the front of the game is just like, oh yeah, it's like, not that much happened. Outside of one emotional moment with Snow early on, there just isn't that much happening for quite a bit of time. You're solving the paradoxes, you're exploring the timelines, you're learning a bit about the world building and seeing alternate versions of places, and some of it is very cool. It's an interesting concept, and I just absolutely agree that it's interesting, but emotionally and narrative-wise, it just feels distant for a very long stretch of the game. You're mostly just being pushed forward from one mystery area to the next mystery area without much paying off beyond moving on to the next area. And because the structure is fragmented, those story beats also feel weirdly disconnected at times. Like, I felt sometimes, oh, this is a cool area and it has an interesting setup. Okay, are we doing something with this? And sometimes the answer is eventually, maybe, if you revisit at the right time. And it just becomes a reoccurring problem, and I get it. The general flow of the game is that there's paradoxes and it's supposed to be fragmented, but I think you can have a fragmented narrative while also being cohesive. Look at Chrono Trigger, for example. But once again, sometimes the game genuinely has some interesting ideas that are just weirdly hidden away, which can be fun to find, but also a little unrewarding sometimes. There's a late game moment involving Hope's assistant who sabotages a timeline because she knows she's fated to die in the correct future. It's such a fascinating plot twist, like genuinely one of those kind of super interesting science fiction drama moments. And the game just kinda doesn't do anything with it. You can miss a huge emotional or story elements like this entirely if you're not poking around enough, and I just kept finding myself wishing that the main story had more confidence in its strongest material, because once 13.2 locks in, it really locks in. Once again, that back half of the game is where things really take off narratively, and a big reason for that is the game's villain, Caius. I get it now. I get why people love this villain. Years ago, he just kind of washed over me. I didn't really understand what the big deal was. Had a cool voice, had the not soul edge, and a cool theme song, but replaying it now, I get it. For a trilogy that's filled with lots of giant mythology that is just in the peripheries and just adds just so much emotional distance that you just do not care about it at the end of the day, Caius is a very present and weirdly human and understandable character and villain. He feels human, something that nothing else in this game, in the series, felt like, especially the first game. Once you learn about Yule, the girl that Noel and Caius both cared for growing up at the literal world's end, and it all just starts hitting harder. Yule has the ability to see the future, and the fact is that every vision, slowly kills her. And because she reincarnates across timelines, she keeps dying again and again and again, life after life. And Caius, he just has to watch this happen forever, because thanks to the goddess Etro, he is immortal. And also, the goddess Etro is the person who blessed Yule with the ability to see into the future. So everything just suddenly clicks about him, because he's not evil. He doesn't want power. He has power. He doesn't want anything more. He doesn't want to conquer the world. He's not out to destroy anything. He's not out to drop a meteor. He's not Sephiroth. He's just exhausted. He's just annoyed and angry, and he feels like it's not right for this girl to have to suffer and die at a young age just because she has been blessed by a goddess. And honestly, he feels kind of justified in his thinking. He has exhausted all options, and what he's doing by trying to destroy the goddess herself and breaking reality, he feels extreme, but emotionally you just get it. And honestly, that emotional core carries so much of the back half of the game. Suddenly, Noel starts making more sense too. You understand why he is the way he is, why he feels displaced, why he struggles, and for the first time, the emotional stakes just kind of feel real. But the problem is, all of that comes very late in the game, like super late. And once the game finally finds that momentum narratively, it's already sprinting towards the end, and it makes the pacing just feel uneven. It has a very slow setup, and then everything suddenly matters, and then you're watching credits. Overall, I don't think I like the plot of 13-2, but weirdly I do like the story, if that distinction makes any sense. The plot is uneven, it's messy, it deals with time travel, and I don't genuinely like time travel stories usually because I feel like time travel is more miss than hit. Very few stories have nailed it. Many have tried it and they don't land the landing, or stick the landing I should say. And this is one of those games that doesn't stick the landing in my opinion. But the story underneath it all, Caius, Noel, Yule, Sarah, the tragedy that is going on, the stuff that really worked for me is there. It just takes a long time to get there. And unfortunately, not everything else in the game is nearly as strong either. There's one more thing I want to talk about that I feel like 13-2 takes a really big step back from in the game, and that's the presentation. Unfortunately, there's one thing that 13-2 doesn't do as well, and it's that presentation. And it really surprised me a little bit more than I thought it would, because if there's one thing Square Enix usually pulls off well, it's spectacle. Even in a Final Fantasy game with problems, you can count on it looking pretty good. Like, with 13, people had a lot of criticisms of it, but I don't think visuals is one of them, because that game looks great all over. It has a really clean art direction, really detailed cutscenes and characters, so on and so forth, and especially that music. And one thing 13-2 does well here is that music. The music here is great, but the visuals, there's a lot going on here, and I don't think this game looks nearly as good. Some of the environments do look great. It does have some really interesting spectacle moments that you kind of expect from Final Fantasy, and once again the creature design is still fantastic, but overall this game just looks a lot lower budget. The cutscenes aren't nearly as polished, characters animate a lot more stiffly, there's less like there's less motion captured scenes, and characters stand around talking at each other more. And certain environments look less detailed, and visually there's just a lot happening on screen usually, like bloom and particle and smoke and sparkles and fog and random effects, all of this stuff just layered on top of the game. It genuinely feels like the game is trying to blind me with the atmosphere, and it looks pretty rough trying to blend all of these things together at the same time. Like, if you look at Final Fantasy 13 and then look at this game, you just notice it immediately. And even now, like, 10 years later, all of this stuff just bogs down PC performance. Like, I remember it being pretty rough on PlayStation 3, and it's still rough here. Even modded, even patched, even after years of people fixing it, it still slows down. Like, random hiccups, random instability, just like... It's frustrating because 13 actually runs pretty perfectly, and then 13-2 just feels like... It feels like you're playing in mud at some areas, and it looks like you're in mud in some areas. It's never unplayable, it's just... I don't know, you just notice it. Once again though, that music is out of control. Like, some of the soundtrack is honestly weird. Like, really weird, but in a good way. It has a lot of the music from the first game returning. It has a lot of that swelling fantasy music. It has lots of that futuristic stuff that 13 blended into it. And this game also has stuff like electronic tracks, rock, orchestral music, melancholy ambient stuff, like a weird like metal chocobo song. And it mostly works. Like, this soundtrack is pretty experimental and it just feels like a vibe all over. So while the visuals are pretty messy, the soundtrack is pretty memorable because it's so all over the place, but never in a bad way. So after replaying Final Fantasy XIII-2 all of these years later, how do I actually feel? Well, I'm glad I came back to this one because for years this game just kind of was barely in my brain as a memory. I remember fragments of it, like Lightning's redesign, the time travel, Moogle throwing, the weird endings, and that's about it. It's just a game I didn't hate or love. It just kind of existed in this strange middle ground in my brain, so replaying it now, I understand why people hold up elements of this game in terms of where it's placed in the trilogy. Because 13-2 is genuinely a game that just feels like it's made by feedback. You can feel that. It just seems like every criticism someone had about the first game was addressed in some way here. Was 13 too linear? Well, there's more exploration. Too restrictive? Now there's branching paths. Combat not deep enough? We have monster builds. We have harder bosses, more experimentation. Want more RPG systems? Well, here you go. And sometimes maybe too many systems, because it definitely doesn't nail everything, but you just feel there was a lot of effort to make this game bigger. It doesn't feel like a bigger overall adventure, but it feels like a bigger game. It's more reactive, more player-driven, more just expressive. And honestly, a lot of those changes work, especially the combat. It is obviously the most strong version of the Paradigm system. Especially that monster raising. It was way deeper than I remember, and I actually loved it. And that linear structure is kicked out of the window. But easily the best part is Caius, and like I said, I get it now. I get why people talk about him the way they do. He is a really cool character. I don't think he's my favorite villain, but if people ask me, is Caius a good villain, I would say, yeah, he definitely is. Like, other villains just want power, destruction, godhood, revenge. Caius, he just feels tired, man. and I get it. I'm tired too, bro. I'm tired too. But even with all of that, I don't love 13-2. And I think I finally figured out why, because for me personally, this game feels like a collection of strong ideas and where the video game industry was going at the time. But they just never fully coalesce, especially emotionally with a story, because it's supposed to be telling this emotional story, but it doesn't nail that landing. The pacing is weird, the story takes way too long to find itself. You spend a massive amount of time just kind of moving through areas, just waiting for something interesting to happen. But when the story does start hitting, it feels like it's just rushing towards its cliffhanger ending. The structure feels more interesting than 13, but somehow less focused. And maybe it's just me, but I struggle with connecting to time travel stories. Especially ones where the rules just feel very loose, and 13-2 definitely has moments where I found myself sitting there like, wait, how does their time travel actually work, and how is these fragment dimensions linking together, and why does everyone seem to know about the paradoxes except for our main protagonist? The game just kind of keeps moving like, hey, just don't worry about it. And honestly, fair enough, I guess. It's fine. If I had to rank it, though, honestly, I'd probably put 13-2 on the same level as 13. And I know that might sound weird, because mechanically, it's clearly the better game, no question, but 13 just had a weird confidence to it. It does have a focus and a very deliberate vision. Even when I disagreed with it, 13-2 just feels reactive towards 13. It's a game that felt like it was responding instead of entirely being its own thing. And like I said, you feel it with the QTEs, you feel it with the dialogue trees. and I just think it makes the game less cohesive at times. It fixes a lot of stuff once again, but it also creates brand new issues. So yeah, it just leaves me in a weird place where I respect 13.2 more than I love it, and I think it's fine that way. Not every game has to be my favorite worth revisiting, but I'm glad I played it. But there is something that 13 and 13.2 have reminded me so far. It's that Final Fantasy can be pretty ambitious when it wants to be. Especially back in the day, like, it was pretty ambitious. It's messy, sure, overcomplicated, definitely, and maybe too ambitious, but even when these games miss, they're trying stuff. And I appreciate that more now than I think I did back then. Because replaying 13 and 13.2 reminded me that even divisive Final Fantasy games usually have some genuinely interesting things to them. Sometimes they're worth revisiting, sometimes not, but I think it's these two games especially, and maybe the third when I get to it, I think people judge them a little too quickly, and maybe they judged elements of them exactly right, but for completely different reasons. And honestly, I think that's one of my favorite parts about revisiting these old games, just trying to understand what people thought then and how I think now, being a more mature or older person. But now, with 13.2 out of the way, we're finally here. We've come up to the final game in the series, the weird one, the one I only played the first few minutes of the demo to, and then I didn't buy. 13. 3 Lightning Returns. Is it just Lightning Returns? Is it Final Fantasy Lightning Returns, or is it Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns? That is a long title, if that is the actual title. I think it's just Lightning Returns. Honestly, I'm pretty excited for this one, but I'm a little scared and a little excited because 13 and 13.2 have like a place in my brain. 13.3 Lightning Returns, I feel like I don't hear much about it, and I feel like I don't see much about it. And it feels like people enjoyed bits of it, but I don't think I've seen anyone talk about like how it ends or what the story is or anything like that. So yeah, I'm with the other two, I've had a hook, a base to jump off of. But with Lightning Returns, I have nothing, so this is going to be completely fresh. So definitely stick around for that one, because I have a feeling this game is going to get weird and odd, but either way, I'm looking forward to it. I'm getting excited. I'm going to take a break from 13 and play like a couple of other games and get a little palate cleanser and go in fresh, but either way. I'm Brian at Valkerion Gaming. Thanks for hanging out for this retrospective. If you played 13.2 back in the day or replayed it recently, let me know which side of the fence you fall on. Do you like this game? Do you hate it? Do you secretly think it's the best Final Fantasy game? Do you think it's the best in the trilogy? Do you think there are things to improve, or there are things that you don't really connect with? Either way, drop your thoughts down below, like, sub, hit the bell for all that good stuff, and I hope to see you again on the next retro review. Boy, oh boy, this was way longer than I thought it would be. I thought this would be like a 15-minute video, and I turned it into something way longer. That was not the plan. I had a lot to say about this game. Man, I hope 13.3 Lightning Returns is weird. That game looks so weird. I'm looking forward to it. Let's go. Is it just Lightning Returns? I think it's just Lightning Returns.